Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome, everyone, to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And my name is David McFadgen. I'll be your host, and very excited to welcome back Howard for the third and final session of his Sensemaker in Residence theory. Everything you know about nature is wrong. The case for the blooming cosmos. In the first session, we started with the Big Bang and the formation of the elementary elements, the formation of stars and galaxies. The second session was all about the origin of life. It's right up until the dawn of humanity, which is the subject of today's session. Really looking forward to it. So, welcome back, Howard.
Thanks, David. Okay, when we left off in our last exciting episode, plants had invented commerce. It's the beginning of economics. Plants had suckered insects they paid off insects with extra nectar and extra pollen in exchange for the plants for the insects operating as the plant's UPS and delivering their pollen to other plants of the same species quite a distance away. This was also not just it was the introduction of advertising. The plants developed these elaborate billboards to attract the insects. We call those billboards flowers and flower petals. It was, well, let me just interrupt myself. Tonight, I want to go into 6 deadly sins. The law of least effort is wrong. Entropy is wrong. The idea that materialism, consumerism, waste, and vain display, the idea that these things are sins, especially that they are sins against nature, is utterly and completely wrong. I promised you the origins of good and evil and the origins of economies, so hopefully we'll be able to get to the origins of good and evil. But I want to cover 2 stories. One is the story of bees, and the other is the story of Anne Boleyn, and show you how these principles that I've just enunciated work. So, okay, we get flowers. Flowers invent commerce. Flowers pay off insects. Flowers develop, or flowering plants develop these elaborate flowers. Now, what are these? These are materialism. These are waste. How do we know that? Because the flowers use them for a short season to attract the insects, then throw them away. I mean, have you ever been on a walk in the park in the middle of the summer or late in the summer and literally walked through heaps of flower petals on the ground? Those are throwaways. We didn't invent materialism, waste, and vain display. Those are vain display pieces, and they serve a vital function. And they serve a vital function in the aspect of this cosmos that demonstrates the best why the law of least effort is wrong. Nature is not parsimonious. Nature is not a pinch penny. She's willing to waste incredible amounts of energy and material stuff in order to do what? The cosmos is a search engine. The cosmos is using you, me, bees, plants, all of us, to search her next possibility space, to search for her next supersized surprise. So the story of the bees goes something like this. I mean, the bees obviously zeroed in on the opportunities that these flowering plants gave them and developed an entire phenotype and an entire society based on taking advantage of these plants. And a colony of bees up in Ithaca, New York, which is where Thomas Seeley is, who's the world's leading expert on bees, is about 20,000 bees. Does that colony do things in tune with the law of least effort? If nature really takes the law of least effort seriously, it should. And does a beehive actually constantly deteriorate into a random whizzle, the way that entropy says? No, just the opposite is true. A beehive is all about surplus and sexuality. The whole damn thing is about surplus and sexuality. In order to make it through the winter, a beehive has to accumulate 44 pounds to 50 pounds of honey. If it doesn't do that during the honey gathering season, it is dead. What will happen is the bees will coagulate in a great big ball, and they will twitch their muscles to keep the whole group warm. And sometime in January or February, when the weather is really dismal, they will run out of honey. And if they do that, the entire colony will die. So a system of materialism, waste, and vain display, the flower system, is excruciatingly important to them. Now, do they do things in tune with the law of least effort, or do they do things more in tune with a cosmos that's a search engine, constantly searching possibility space? The beehive is a search engine. The beehive operates on having roughly 5% of its population as seekers, as explorers, and 95% of its population as conformists, rigid conformists. Why? Because the seekers are able to find the next flower patch. And conformist bees do an incredibly effective job of mining a flower patch. So conformity and nonconformity, opposites are joined at the hip. Conformity and nonconformity work together to turn the beehive into a search engine and an accumulator of materialistic stuff. So imagine that you are a bee just breaking into adolescence. You are a young bee. You've been in the hive, inside the hive, all of your life. You now have no idea of what your purpose is in life. So you step out of the hive and you fly around in a figure, this actually, I was about to say figure eight, but it's more complicated than that. You basically follow your instincts. You follow your nose. You follow your curiosities. And if we were elder bees looking at you, taking off and flying 8 miles for no purpose whatsoever, we would say, oh my God, these damn bohemian bees, these hippie bees, they are wasting the resources of the hive. Well, meanwhile, we conformists are going out and mining the flower patch of the day. And we are mining it for all it's worth. And when we come back with our we have these hip hairs that are like carrying baskets. And we have a public stomach. We have 2 stomachs, a private stomach and a public stomach. When we come back and our public stomach is filled with nectar and our carrying hairs are filled with pollen, unloader bees come over to us just inside the hive in a big public space. It's like a big stage or a big basketball court. And they come over to us, they check us out, they stick their tongues down our throat to see whether we're carrying nectar. They discover we are. They feel with their antennae our carrying hairs to see if we're carrying pollen. They discover we are. They go crazy with excitement, and they treat us as if they were groupies and we were rock stars. They crowd around us and they unload us as quickly as possible. And that excites us tremendously. Attention is not just the oxygen of the human soul. Attention is the oxygen of the bee colony as well, the beehive. And we go back out to the flower patch of the day to get more pollen and nectar and come back to get more attention. Well, eventually the flower patch that we are mining runs out. There's no more pollen. There's no more nectar. We fly out to it anyway. We come back with our carrying hairs empty and our public stomach empty. The bees at the unloading dock treat us brutally. They stick their tongues down into our public stomach, discover that it's empty, check out our carrying hairs, discover that those are empty too. They turn their backs on us, literally. And this discourages a bee. How do we know? Because the bee's temperature begins to go down. And the bee, instead of walking upright, comes closer and closer to crawling. And you as a conformist bee go back out to that flower patch over and over again, even though there's nothing there to find anymore. It's like this is the company plant, and you've been accustomed to a paycheck, and you can't believe that the plant has shut down. Meanwhile, the nonconformist bees are out there flying their lazy circles, following their curiosity, and seemingly wasting the resources of the hive. And if they find a flower patch they get excited about, they come back and they dance on that platform, that basketball platform, where you came back with your lack of pollen and nectar. The bunch of you who are running out of pollen and nectar and no longer getting attention eventually become discouraged. You go inside the hive, you literally crawl instead of walking upright, and you beg other bees for honey, for food. And it's humiliating. And your temperature has gone way down. In other words, you're in a state of clinical depression. Meanwhile, the searcher bee comes back, and if she's found a flower patch she's excited about, she starts dancing. And she dances a little figure eight that indicates where the food is and how easy or difficult it is to get to it. And the length of her dance shows how excited she is. Sometimes she can dance for 3 seconds. Sometimes she can dance for 27 minutes. And she dances to get an audience. And who are her audience? Unemployed bees is what Thomas Seeley calls them. Us depressed bees who no longer have a reason to live, who no longer have a sense of meaning. So 4 or 5 out of the 500 explorer bees, 4 or 5 come back having found flower patches that they find promising. And they compete like breakdancers at Times Square for an audience. And if you and I are discouraged bees, we feel them with our antennae, we follow them, they put a little bit of what they've found in our mouths. And if they rouse us from our lethargy, if they rouse us from our depression and get us excited, we will go out and check what they have to say. We will go to the flower source they are talking about and check it out. And if it's exciting, we will come back and dance too. And ultimately, the bee who gets the most backup dancers wins. And all of the conformists go out to the flower patch she has been advertising. And we will plunder it for all it's worth. Meanwhile, we're performing a service for the flowers. We are addicted to a specific species of flower for a brief time. And we go from flower to flower, carrying the pollen of the flowers and enabling the sexual process. Now, this is a search engine pattern. It involves opposites joined at the hip. It involves conformity and diversity in competition, in a dynamic competition with each other. Each cannot survive without the other. It is incredibly anti-entropic, and it is most anti-entropic if you look to see what this is really all about in the end. It's really all about sex. And sex is one of the most wasteful, devious processes this cosmos has ever invented. It is so far from the law of least effort and entropy that it's ridiculous. What sex is ultimately all about is a chromosome. Okay, take a chromosome and it's all knotted into a little microscopic bundle, like a tangle of your wires for your headsets, for your earplugs, in a drawer. And so it's tiny. But if you stretch it all out, it's 3 feet long. And what is it ultimately trying to do? It has a double strand of DNA. The double strand of DNA separates, gets involved with messenger RNA, And God, how do we even describe this? The male strand of DNA gets together with the female strand of DNA. They do an incredibly complex exchange to determine whose properties will come out on top on any given part of what you are about to be. And then they start creating a new creature, a new bee, or a new human being. Now, frankly, this process, meiosis and mitosis, is so complicated that it is almost impossible, even for a science popularizer. I try to write sound so it's breathtakingly easy and fun. It's almost impossible for even me to describe. It is the very opposite of the law of least effort. How nature ever produced chromosomes. How nature ever, well, it's easy to see how nature would produce cells. You take the Murchison meteorite, which came from Mars, and you grind up a little bit of it, and you drop it into water. It automatically makes what are called lipid envelopes. It automatically makes little bubbles. So that's the beginning of a cell. But how the RNA and DNA all came together, I mean, that's just utterly beyond belief. It is literally one of the most complex things in the world. And again, it's anti-entropic. It's not things falling apart, it's things falling up. It's things falling onto consistently higher levels. How did we get from bees to human beings? That's a huge question. Okay, so sex is really the big mystery. And since sex was generated by the cosmos, not by human beings, this is a cosmos capable of producing sex. What does that say about the cosmos? That it's a cosmos, complexity understates it. That it's a cosmos of the ornate, the flamboyant, the extraordinary, the unbelievable. A flower is ornate, extravagant, unbelievable, astonishing, and a flower is just a part of this integrated process, this multi-species search process. What does this have to do with human beings? And well, first of all, there is another factor you have to look at here. It's differentiation and integration. That's a phrase that Herbert Spencer came up with. He was influenced in the 19th century. He was looking at the works of the early embryologists, and he saw how once cell theory came into play, you could see that cells were differentiating in an early embryo, that they all started out the same. And then some became nerve cells, some became bone cells, some became stomach cells. And so what he was seeing that increasingly the cells in an embryo are differentiating from each other. They're splitting off from each other. But they can only do it if they create a larger whole within which they integrate. Stomach cells are not going to get very far in life without the rest of you. Brain cells are not going to get very far in life without stomach cells. And stomach cells and brain cells are not going to get very far in life without skeletal cells. So differentiation and integration is something that you see at every stage of cosmic evolution. 300,000 years ago, differentiation and integration showed up in a very strange way. We are taught that we humans need the following things. We need food, clothing, and shelter. Those are our basic needs. Well, I got news for you. Those are not our basic needs. 300,000 years ago, 100,000 years before we became modern human beings, we had already invented stone tools. That helped us take care of food, clothing, and shelter. But 300,000 years ago, we invented something new. We invented the process of taking a rock, putting it on a bigger rock, a flat rock, taking another rock, and using it to grind up the rock that we're focusing our attentions on. Why? To make makeup. 300,000 years ago, long before we became modern humans, we had already invented 70 shades of makeup. And the most popular forms of makeup were sparkling makeup. We wanted to make ourselves sparkle, literally. What do we use makeup for? If your tribe paints itself red and my tribe paints itself blue, we use makeup for differentiation, to split off into separate groups. And this is where evil comes in, because evil is all about us versus them. Margaret Mead said that every tribe in the world outlaws murder. And what is murder? It's killing another human being. The problem is that the name of every tribe means human being. Meaning, if we're in a tribe of 70 people, we are not allowed to kill our fellow tribe members, the other 69 members of the tribe. But guess what? Other people on the planet are not humans. So they are fair game. And it is perfectly appropriate to kill them. This is differentiation and integration. This is us versus them. This is where evil comes from. Because one tribe's good is another tribe's evil. Take right now the battle between the Trumpites and the non-Trumpites. In the Trumpites' view, there are these wicked radical liberals, and they are trying to impose a totalitarian communist state that robs every single citizen of his or her independence and liberty on the United States of America. And there is one person on this planet sent by God himself to save us from this wickedness. And his name is Donald Trump. So anything associated with Donald Trump is good, and anything that's against Donald Trump is bad. Meanwhile, there are the people on the other side of things who, and I'm one of them, who regard everything that Donald Trump has ever done as evil and profoundly disgusting, and anything associated with him as evil and profoundly disgusting. How does that differ from one tribe painting itself blue and one tribe painting itself red? It is different because it uses ideas to differentiate one group from another. Yes, the MAGA cap definitely sets you apart. And by the way, there's a new MAGA cap. The MAGA cap for 2016 was red. The MAGA cap for 2024 is blue. And that cap's already being offered. And it says Trump 2024. In addition to whatever additional MAGA stuff there is up there on your head. So we started differentiating into separate tribes a long time ago. And so did bees. A beehive, if it is successful at accumulating enough honey, is able to produce a whole mess of larvae. And some of those, about 1,000 bees in a 20,000 bee colony, are females, sexually active females, potential queens. And some of those are males, drones. And guess what? They are the ultimate in consumerism, waste, and vain display. They do nothing useful in the hive whatsoever. But there comes a season when hives have sex with each other. And how do they manage that? Their males and females all fly out to a ritual mating zone, a particular field, where not only they congregate, but the males and females of other hives congregate. And the males and females of many hives fuck like crazy. And it really is like crazy, because a male, if he succeeds in impregnating a female, dies almost immediately. Talk about waste, consumerism, materialism, waste, and vain display. This is it. And out of any 1,000 queens, only about 3 make it. Only about 3 manage to find a terrific piece of real estate that will protect them and allow them to create an entire hive. That's a tremendous amount of waste and vain display. Human groups, roughly once a generation, make war with each other. The number of bodies piles up over a period of time. Males are treated as if they are totally unnecessary, as if they are expendable waste. A war is a display of surplus. Generally, the group that has the greatest amount of surplus wins. For example, now in the face-off between the United States and China, the United States is running a $600 billion a year trade deficit, almost more than $500 billion. And China is running a $500 billion a year trade surplus. And China has a $3.5 trillion, last time I looked, trade surplus altogether. Well, think of that in terms of beehives. Our beehive doesn't have those 44 pounds of honey that it takes to make it through the next winter. The Chinese, have that honey. Wars are a test of surplus. When groups go up against each other, the one that has the greatest amount of surplus almost always wins. Is this similar to beehives? Yes, because surplus in a beehive allows you to produce lots and lots of sexually active queens and males, but it also allows you to do something else. It allows you to create so many larvae that the hive can split in two. And the active queen will fly out with half of the hive members, 10,000 hive members, behind her and find a new location in which to build a hive. And the hive left at home will then choose a new queen and elevate her to reproductive status. And a hive that is really doing well with surplus this is called hiving, can split in two like that many times and create many copies of itself. Although, okay, so here's another problem with sex and how it relates to the law of least effort. Wait, what was I about to tell you? I forget. But if you go up to the story of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, you'll find the same factors at work. We are taught that that in sex, a male will accumulate large amounts of surplus and display them to a female. For example, a peacock will show off his perfect, wonderful, enormous tail. Well, his enormous tail is the most counterproductive thing on earth. It advertises to predators that here I am, I'm meat, grab me. And it makes it easier to grab a male. But if you look at the story of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, you see that there's far more than just an individual showing off his poetry, giving away jewelry, taking women out to dinner, buying a sports car, all the things that males do to show off to women. To get into the position of being the alpha male with access to as much sex as he wanted in his society, Henry VIII didn't just have to play his cards well. His family had to play its cards well for 400 years. And innumerable wars. And what are wars? Wars are tests of surplus in which vast numbers of human beings are killed and vast amounts of material stuff are wasted and destroyed. And it's very much like beehives going up against each other in terms of who can produce the most surplus and who can produce the most new hives. So in human sex, there's far more than just an individual's ability to show off going on. I mean, yes, it's all about materialism, waste, and vain display, consumerism. The more you can display those things, the easier it is to get a female, including in this in the current age where we think we're beyond these things. The research shows we're not beyond these things. There's a whole family's history of having built up to a certain level that goes into your ability to reproduce and my ability to reproduce. And I've got news for you. We do not reproduce. Sex is not about reproduction. Sex is not about the selfish genome. Not at all. Because you can have 4 kids and each one of those kids can be an utter and complete surprise to you, and not a single one is a clone of you. Not a single one. Each is a totally unique individual. Now, how do we explain that in terms of Dawkins, the selfish gene? We don't. But we can explain it in terms of this is a cosmos that's a search engine, searching out her next possibilities, searching for her next supersized surprise. Every creature created by sex is utterly and completely unique. And each one does what you as a young bee first coming out of the hive and wandering around seemingly at random did. Each one tries to find his or her place in society. And in doing so, each one becomes like the finger that you run through a shag rug to find your lost contact lens. Each one becomes another feeler of possibility space, another vital part of the search engine of a cosmos looking for her next possibilities. So that's it. I've wandered a lot, but was it of any value to you?
Wonderful, Howard. Okay, we will pivot to Q&A now. So feel free to start dropping your questions in the chat. We are recording this session, so if you don't want to appear on YouTube, just indicate so in your question and I will read it for you. Otherwise, I will call on you so you can ask Howard yourself. Do you unmute? And I will warm Howard up with a couple questions of my own. So my introduction to Howard Bloom, and still one of my favorite books, was The Lucifer Principle. Nature of good and evil, right? What would you describe as the main message there, the Lucifer Principle?
Well, that there is a holy trinity of the Lucifer Principle, superorganisms. That is, you and I are made up of 100 trillion cells. Each of those 100 trillion cells only sees what's going on around it and what's going on inside of it. Has no idea what a David Fanzian or a Howard Bloom is. In the same way, we human beings are part of larger social agglomerations, and we are like disposable cells in the body of that organism. One illustration of that in a strange way is the fact that Henry VIII was only given as much sexual access as he had because of his family's efforts over the course of at least 400 years, because we don't know what happened before the Battle of Hastings with his family to put his family on top. So it was a multi-generational effort, which means that his family was a superorganism of a kind, in which people like Henry VIII were disposable individuals. Henry VIII was the equivalent of a drone in a bee colony. I mean, he tried desperately to have male children. He wasn't able to do it. However, with one of his wives, he produced Queen Elizabeth, who was one of the most astonishing cultural figures in the history of England and the history of the English-speaking world. Now, did that mean that he was successful in reproducing from a genetic point of view? No. Queen Elizabeth died without children. In what sense, then, was Henry VIII successful? And successful on behalf of this multi-generational project called his family. Queen Elizabeth was a master of memes. In Richard Dawkins' work, there are two forms of replicators, things that make copies of themselves. One is genes, and the other is memes. Memes are ideas. And about 11,000 years ago, we invented the city. We built the first city out of big stones, Jericho. Then a few thousand years later, somebody came up with an absolutely ridiculous idea. Turn trash into treasure. There was this stuff that could bog you down and kill you in the rainy season. And whoever this visionary was came up with the idea of taking this stuff that could kill you and fashioning it in something that no human had ever seen before, a geometric figure, a rectangle, and leaving it out in the sun to dry. Not only was this idea ridiculous, taking up poison and turning it into some kind of a piston in culture. It was ridiculous because he had a further idea that you'd make 3 million of these things and then pile them on top of each other and create 3-room apartment complexes with them. That was the first brick city. And cities allowed something that hadn't been possible before. Before then, you were a member of your tribe. And as Margaret Mead said, you couldn't kill the other members of your tribe, but everybody else in the universe was fair game. But those tribal members were the only people that you could be close to. Now, if you were in a city, you could find common interests and you could gather together around common ideas, not just common genes. And that was the beginning of subcultures. And subcultures differentiate themselves from each other with things like red versus blue body paint, but different by having different ideas. And the struggle between ideas began. So Henry VIII was not a good caretaker of genes. He tried his best. He failed when it came at least to having male heirs. But when it came to memes, holy smokes, Queen Elizabeth was it. The Elizabethan age is something, I mean, it gave us Shakespeare, it gave us all kinds of poetry, John Donne and a whole bunch of others. It was a major milestone in the development of British culture. However, all of this is about consumerism, waste, and vain display. Ideas are vain displays. Wow, what important fundamental building blocks of the cosmos those vain displays have turned out to be.
So at one point in our distant history, there was an almost perfect correlation between genes and culture. Every tribe had its own culture.
Every tribe had its own culture, and you can look at this in the Bible. The Jews were a tribe. Moses tried his best to put together a new tribe, and he succeeded. And he put that new tribe together around 2 things: genes. He isolated them in the desert for 40 years. Why? To inculcate a whole new set of ideas in them. But many of the directives in the Old Testament are about not sinning by mating with people outside your tribe, not mating with Canaanites or Philistines or any of the enemies of the Jewish people. But he also inculcated a set of ideas. And he summed it up in a slogan. I mean, Moses was a brilliant marketer. You can see this in Sigmund Freud's Moses and Monotheism, which is a brilliant analysis of how Moses put together a new people. And his slogan was, "Listen up, Israel. We have a God who is our Lord, and there is only one of him." Or as it's more commonly translated, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And Moses instructed that you would put this on parchments and tie it to your wrists and arms every day, and that you would put it on your doorpost so that you would see it when you went out and when you went in. And in the West, these ideas were designed to demarcate a genetic tribe and set it apart from others. By the way, there's something else interesting. Moses gave the Jews dietary laws. And the dietary laws, what you eat determines how you smell. So if 2 tribes are differentiating themselves from each other with, among other things, different dietary laws, those different tribal members are going to smell different, which means that when the members of one tribe meet the members of another tribe, those other guys, those bad guys, are going to smell bad to us. Astonishing. But along came Jesus of Nazareth and Yahushua. And Jesus was preaching that he was going to go up to Jerusalem for Passover. And Passover, traditionally, you leave an empty cup for the prophet Elijah, who will come to announce the Messiah. And Jesus said that the kingdom of God is about to arrive. Well, his prediction turned out to be false. He had the Last Supper, and the kingdom of God did not come. In fact, there was disaster. He was crucified by the Romans. And then a guy came named Paul of Tarsus, who was also Jewish, but had grown up in a different environment, came along. And Paul of Tarsus had grown up in a big Roman city. Jesus of Nazareth had grown up in the backwater town of Galilee. And his father, Paul of Tarsus's father, was a citizen of the Roman Empire. And Tarsus was an active trade town. So it was constantly the home to flows of alien cultures. And Paul became a powerful, passionate enemy of Christianity. He hated and loathed Christianity. And he was busy doing his best to persecute Christians, both. And then one day on riding his ass to Damascus, he had a sudden revelation. He was hit by a light. It threw him off of his ass. And he had this sudden revelation that Jesus was right. And he became Jesus' most active disciple. But he created an entire new religion that had nothing to do with Jesus. And in his religion, Jesus's death on the cross had absolved mankind of the sin he had inherited from Adam and Eve. And he went to Jerusalem to sell this brilliant innovation to the guys who had been disciples of Jesus, and they wanted nothing to do with it, nor did any of the Jews. It did not seem to be a Jewish kind of idea. So Paul said, fuck you, I'll sell this idea to the Romans in the Roman Empire, since you guys have abandoned it. And in doing that, Paul freed a set of ideas that had been the markers of a genetic tribe from their genes. He said, it doesn't matter what genetic group you come from. If you assume these beliefs, you will be saved through the crucifixion of Jesus. Ideas became gene-free. And they had done that under Confucius just 200 years earlier, but that's another story.
Okay, thank you. Megan had a question.
Thanks, Howard. I'm seeing all these enormous differences between your cosmology and the kind of orthodoxy that I grew up with. I'm in the atheistic sort of orthodoxy, and how that underpins how we all function and relate to our fellow humans and our lives. I'm interested in your opinion of how these understandings diverged. How did we get to this point where the orthodoxy is so different from the story that you're telling us?
I don't know, Megan. It baffles me. I've been an atheist since I was 12 years old. And I don't understand how I got into this business of putting a timeline together of the cosmos that would include everything from quarks to the poetry of Andrew Marvell and the shenanigans of Donald Trump. But somehow I was set on this course. And the timeline of the cosmos disagrees with things like entropy and the law of least effort so profoundly that it's ridiculous. And all of the insights I'm giving you come from that timeline, which has grown richer and richer over the course of the roughly 65 years that I've been putting it together. And here at the age, I have a friend who's much older than I am. And every time we talked, I used to tell him every day that you wake up is the beginning of the most important 20 years of your life. And then one day I decided to look up his age. And he was 78 years old. His name was Buzz Aldrin. And I'm about to be 78 years old in June. And I'm telling you, Megan, all this that I put together is just the first stair step of the next set of insights. And the only way I can answer the question is, again, I've been putting together this timeline. It is stupid that other people haven't been putting it together. And if I'm stuck with the only one being it, well, we all need a purpose in life, We all need to differentiate, we all need to integrate and differentiate. Makeup, we use makeup to show, hey, I'm one of you. I'm painted red like you are, accept me in your group. And then makeup is designed to differentiate us from the other members of the group in some small way so that we earn the attention of the group. And I don't know, I happen to have been outside of groups my entire life. And I told you the story last time. I was at a rock concert one day because I used to work with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, and people like that. And so I was at a rock concert in the first 15 rows, and everybody was clapping, and I was clapping with them. And I suddenly noticed that I wasn't quite clapping with them, because every time they had their hands stretched out like this, my hands were together like this, and vice versa. So I seem to be born to step into the spaces between the steps that other people take.
Maggie, you had an interesting question.
Yes, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. I had a question. I really admire Noah Yuval Harari, who wrote Homo Deus. I don't know if you're
right
familiar with that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he talks about is we've never been in this situation before because of AI, where we can literally change the biology of human beings. And I was just curious what your thoughts are on that topic.
Well, there's Bloomism. Nature loves those who oppose her most. What does that mean? Since nature is constantly seeking her next shocking, astonishing, totally unbelievable, totally unpredictable surprise, her next supersized surprise, she uses everything she's ever produced as her feelers into the realm of that next supersized surprise. And that means that her creatures, whether they're quarks, atoms, galaxies, or human beings, are constantly breaking her old rules, constantly destroying her old status quo, and stepping upward to systems so complex they have new rules of their own, which you would never have suspected before. And if quarks, atoms, galaxies, and stars are born to do this, what do you think we're born to do? To change, upgrade, and uplift nature in every conceivable way. And we can do it in a way that no creatures before us have been able to do it. We can do it consciously. We can do it with our imaginations. We can do it with that accumulation of knowledge that we call a culture. Because no one of us comes up with brilliant ideas on his or her own, no matter how brilliant we may seem. We're all just standing on the top of a pyramid of cultural brilliance. And we are all standing at the bottom of the next pyramid, and it is our job to build and discover the next stair step up. And that means breaking nature's laws over and over again. Nature is not about status quo. Nature is about productive, inventive, astonishing, ornate change.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. So are you hopeful? I mean, do you think this is going to have a positive?
It's going to have an extraordinarily positive outcome. And because these things always have, even when they've created what seems to be devastation. The progress of the cosmos has risen like a phoenix from that devastation and built on its ashes, has found its ashes to be richly productive.
Thank you.
Andre, you had a question.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, you actually answered it a little bit in your last answer there. But I'm just going to read my question. If the cosmos is engaged in exploring possibilities in a search engine, as you put it, how can we contend with technocratic humans potentially diminishing or even removing possibilities of diversity through ecosystem destruction or mass extinction events through a seemingly unhinged practice of wasteful consumerism on the planet?
Well, I disagree with most of the cliches in that statement, as you can see. I look to things like AI, Elon Musk, who I admire tremendously and who I had 4 phone calls with 15 years ago. Elon Musk believes that AI could destroy us. Well, it's true. I mean, nuclear weapons could have destroyed us too. But the fact is that ultimately, in the long run, every new thing that the universe invents, because the universe has invented AI through you and me, or at least through our culture, has turned out to be for the better in the long run. There may have been short-term destruction, but AI only functions if it is in synergy with you and me, if it's in synergy with us. And it is, the only danger, I think, is that in our using AI to fight wars, we're training our AI to kill. And any AI that can kill our enemies in the long run can make a mistake and kill you and me. And that's something we have to watch out for. But something else we have to recognize is Western civilization is the first civilization in the history of mankind to outlaw slavery. To outlaw slavery, the kind of slavery for which we feel guilty, was 10 times as bad in the Muslim world. 10 times as bad. 10 times as many people were captured. 10 times as many people were killed under slavery in Islam. Did Islam ever outlaw slavery? No. We outlawed slavery. We are the first civilization in the history of mankind to develop an ecological awareness, to be conscious of the 6 million species of organisms with which we share the planet, and to start to protect them. So we are not just random destroyers. We are people whose critiques of ourselves lift us to a higher level and make it possible for us to do things like protect species diversity in the environment. Something has never existed in any other culture at all, including in these blissfully utopian indigenous cultures that supposedly respect nature. I mean, you know the theory of why there were tons of mega organisms in North America and South America until roughly something like 12,000 years ago, 12 to 20,000 years ago. And then suddenly there was a mass die-off of these creatures. And many researchers believe that those mass die-offs came from the invasion of North America that came through the Bering Straits of human beings. And if that were true, because there's a great deal of controversy about that right now, but if that were true, it means that indigenous tribes that supposedly live in harmony with nature managed to extinguish amazing species like mammoths and giant sloths. So, but what does that indicate? We are literally the first culture to become aware of nature in the way that we've become aware of it and to want to protect it.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, no, I appreciate what you've said. From studying indigenous cultures and myths, which is something I've been doing for the last few years, I agree with you that they didn't necessarily always live in harmony with the planet, but there's evidence through their myths that they've learned. And so to say that we're the first to have an ecological kind of, that I feel like that's inaccurate, because if you read their myths, through their myths have been teaching themselves this. It's not something that they've always had, but if you follow a lot of their myths, it's something that they built towards and then eventually found a harmony through their culture, which was then, largely destroyed by colonization, by something else.
Well, the difference, I would suspect, because what you're saying, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, because I wasn't looking for this kind of thing when I was studying indigenous cultures a long time ago. But we have put these ideas on a vastly different scale. They're not ideas that just apply to 12,000 people in the Amazon basin. These are ideas that have been spread to billions of human beings. The idea of protecting what we call protecting the planet. Because we could do a critique of that phrase, protecting the planet. One way or the other, the Chinese are trying to get ahead of us in green technologies. The Chinese are trying to get ahead of us in zero carbon emissions and all of the things that would allegedly save the planet. That's 1.4 billion Chinese. I worked with the former president of India, Dr. APJ Kalam, and my contacts with India make it very apparent that they too are obsessed with the idea of doing things in a green way. That's another 1.4 billion people. And then there's the billion people or the 700 million people of the EU plus the United States. So that is consciousness of trying to protect the environment on a vastly different scale than 75 to 17,000 people on the banks of the Orinoco River. Does that make sense in terms of what you've studied?
Yeah, we've also never had this population level ever, right? So it's a very recent reality that we're living in.
Right.
So I don't know how useful it is to compare them, but I totally appreciate your answer. Yeah.
Right, let's move on to Elliot's question.
Hi, let me bring it up. So following on, I think it was Maggie talking about Yuval Noah Harari. He talks about our world being dominated by fictions or memes. And so I'm wondering where you see humanity going kind of in this cycle you talk of kind of superorganism and meme spread. And you spoke about every generation experiences a war. And now that our weapons are kind of the scope and scale they are, just what you see as our future and what you feel whenever things stabilize into that future, what the memes or fictions in that next phase will actually look like.
Well, unfortunately, there is a face-off between the United States and China. China has been very aggressively moving ahead, and we've been very aggressively moving backwards. Despite Elon Musk and despite Silicon Valley. And because they do have a surplus, the odds of a war are good. But the whole idea horrifies me, Elliot, because, I was born to duck under a desk in case of a nuclear attack, not that would help much. And so I was born under the specter of the total annihilation of humanity at the hands of its own weapons. And that could happen. But I don't think it's going to happen, because the amount of destruction in this universe is so outweighed by the amount of construction that's ridiculous. Back to the question that we were just talking about a minute ago. Today, pro-ecological thoughts are available on an industrial scale. Well, we didn't invent industrial scales. Nature invented industrial scales. The number of stars that she produced, the number of atoms that she produced, the number of galaxies that she produced, are all in the trillions or even billions of trillions. And then there's the life process itself, which has produced, if we tried to count up all the cells that have been created since 4 billion years ago, the number would be absolutely astonishing. And colonies of cells make war with each other. Bacterial colonies make war with each other with weapons of mass destruction, with weapons of mass annihilation, with chemical weapons that are, I'm about to say designed, but that's not a good phrase, nonetheless, that are used to wipe out an entire different colony. 7 trillion members of a different colony gone, poof, like that, at the hands of chemical weaponry. But somehow, the amount of production has always outweighed the amount of destruction, and the universe has kept stepping up. And we will either be part of that process of stepping up, or we will be abandoned. And if we are abandoned, our bodies will be the platform on which something will climb.
And if I can ask just a quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
And if we do step up and kind of transcend this trend, do you have a sense or a vision of what you think that would look like? And
Well, you know, I have this little document. It's 100 pictures and 2,800 words called Garden the Solar System Green the Galaxy. And I think I mentioned this last time, but our uniqueness, one of our uniquenesses is our ability to research and develop. And as a consequence, to fast forward evolution in a massive way. But we're not the only ones who can do this. Bacteria are capable of research and development too. And right now there are bacteria 12 miles beneath your feet and mine, turning granite into bio stuff, bringing dead, seducing, kidnapping, and recruiting dead atoms, abiotic atoms, and molecules into the process of life. So we're not the only ones who can do that. The thing that we can do that no other species can do is take life beyond the skies. This, once upon a time, was a barren, hostile ball of stone, and we managed to green and garden it. By we, I mean all living creatures. Now the job is to look at all the other trillions and trillions of barren, hostile gravity balls above our head and to green and garden those too, because the imperative of life is to reproduce. The imperative of life is to spread into as many niches as possible before the next mass extinction comes. And there have been 148 mass extinctions so far. And guess what? Life has transcended every single one of them, with us or without us, but preferably with us the next time around.
thank you.
Very excited to tag in Greg Thomas. Greg, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Aha.
Okay, it's great to be here. And I checked out the first two and I said, let me join in this one live. So my question, Howard, has to do with Black American culture.
Right.
I am a student of the work of Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray. And they both had a very strong view that Black American culture, if you look at it politically, socially, economically, from enslavement through Reconstruction and afterwards, we weren't a part of the development of that, but that the area that we did develop profoundly was culture.
Right.
And considering your experience in the music industry in particular, I was wondering what you would have to say about that point of view. And I was just wondering, even though your experience has to do with pop music and rock and roll, if you have a perspective on jazz, which is my area of specialty.
Well, let's see. That's we could spend 3 sessions doing that one all by itself. I have this new book. It's called The Genius of the Beast. Or no. Sorry, that's not the book. The book is Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me: A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. You can see the cover over my shoulder in all probability. And it's about this. When I was 12 years old, I became absolutely fascinated by the ecstatic experience, by what William James called the varieties of the religious experience. And what was it that introduced, I've been having a hard time figuring out what exactly introduced me to this, but very early I recognized that what carried the ecstatic experience into my life was Black culture. And there was a word in Black culture that became exquisitely important to me. And that word was soul. And then when I was 11 years old, my parents tried to make me normal, which they tried every 2 years or so to do, and it never worked, by sending me to summer camp with other kids. And I took a suitcase full of science books and science fiction books, intent on continuing to read 2 books a day while I was up there. But this was a camp mostly of kids from Buffalo, New York, my hometown. But there was one kid from New York City. And if you see a kid from New York City in the midst of a whole bunch of kids from elsewhere, that kid from New York City is 4 years older, no matter what his actual age is, than anybody else. And he taught me that there was a music that embodied freedom, and it was called jazz. And I had been listening to Rachmaninoff, Bartok, Stravinsky, Beethoven, Mozart up until then. And now all of a sudden I went crazy over jazz. And jazz, again, I've been in pursuit of the ecstatic experience, trying to understand it, trying to bring it within the realm of science, trying to bring it into the realm of this big picture view of the cosmos, because it's exquisitely important. It's like sex. If we don't understand it, we don't understand this cosmos. If we can't see where it fits in the timeline of the cosmos and cosmic evolution, we don't understand the cosmos, and science isn't science yet. So Black music has been the repository of soul for all of America, and eventually not just for all of America, but for all of the West. But there's something that's seldom, there are a couple of things that are seldom looked at. First of all, there's been an exquisite relationship between Black culture and Jews. Martin Luther King was not just Martin Luther King, he was a team. And the team of people behind him included a Jewish guy who was profoundly important in helping build him.
Talking about Heschel?
What's that?
You talking about Abraham Heschel?
No, Stanley something or other.
Okay.
And then Aretha Franklin
Greenberg
had a Jewish producer. And that combination really, really made extraordinary music. And why the souls of these two people meet and overlap and are capable of nourishing each other. I mean, Stax Records was owned by Jews, and they brought a lot of people who would have died in obscurity to prominence in Black culture. They had this exquisite taste for Black music. So this synergy has been a very, very powerful one. And it's been with me ever since I was 12 years old. And it's been vital. If you read Einstein, Michael Jackson, and me, there's a new thing, the Howard Bloom Institute. And one of the most active members came up with a project based on Einstein, Michael Jackson, and me. It's to show and further integrate Black culture and everything else. There's one other little insight. One of my clients, Ralph McDonald, who was the most extraordinary percussionist I have ever witnessed in my life, and who became my mentor because he taught me an awful lot about Black culture. He was in love with a book called The Music of the Two Worlds. And it was about how African music integrated with European music. Well, there's something very special about this that's not normally recognized. And that is that without European music, Black music would be flat. Without Black music, European music would have no soul. Mm-hmm. It's a synergy between the music of these multi-continents that has made the music we know today. And I had a client who founded a band. He was a drummer. And his dad, I used to get these calls saying, Dad is coming into town. He wants to meet you tomorrow at the Plaza Hotel for lunch. And I would say, I can't go to the Plaza Hotel for lunch. They require a jacket and tie. I don't own a jacket and tie. And they would say, you didn't hear me. Dad says, tomorrow you're meeting him at 1 o'clock at the Plaza Hotel for lunch. The dad in question was a co-founder of a little organization called the CIA. And his kids, one of his sons, and he used to tell me the story. He used to go to Africa to palaver with the chiefs. And while he was palavering, he'd take his 5-year-old son, and his 5-year-old son would sit at the feet of the drummers and be absolutely fascinated. Well, then his son became a drummer and he co-founded a band, and the band was called The Police. So I didn't believe Dad's story, because when you're talking to a CIA guy, you never know what's fact and what's fiction. And then his son came to me and said, look, here's what I've done. I've gone looking for the roots of my music. So I've gone to Africa with a film crew, and I have sought out the tribes that have kept their culture intact the most isolated tribes, and gone to listen to their music, because that's where my roots are. The difficulty, Greg, was that the music he listened to was flat. Without the European element, it didn't have the melody. Black music adds the rhythm. White music adds the melody. Black music adds the soul. You know, as much as Mozart was trying to lift us up, to lift up our souls, there is something very different about the way that Black culture does it. So what we call Black culture is a synergy. What we call modern Jewish culture is a synergy. All of these cultures are synergy. Yes, we differentiate. We reach out like different feelers in a search engine, but we integrate. And we do both those things. Opposites are joined at the hip. And Black culture's contribution has been astonishing.
Thank you so much. One quick follow-up. Are you familiar with the book, The Jazz of Physics by Stefan Alexander?
No, I've heard of it. Can you give me a summary in a couple of sentences?
Oh, that would be tough. Goodness gracious. I would just recommend that you check it out.
Right.
Because considering your interest and your background and your experience, he's at Brown now. I met him when he was at Dartmouth. My daughter was there at the time. And I really think you would enjoy it. So check it out.
Sounds worth checking into. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Great. John, you're up next.
Yes, thank you. I'm really enjoying your optimism, but I want to look at this on a different time scale. Doesn't science tell us that eventually our sun is going to die, destroy the Earth, destroy the solar system? Isn't there only one way that this story can end? So how can you be optimistic?
Well, there's an even greater catastrophe ahead of us than the sun dying. And that is I don't know if you've seen, I have this big bagel theory of the universe that I came up with when I was 16 years old that tells the story of the beginning, middle, and end of the universe and predicted dark energy 38 years in advance. It also predicted inflation about 20 years in advance. And if that theory is correct, if imagine a bagel. And out of the hole at the center comes a big bang on the upside and of normal matter and a big bang of antimatter on the underside. And eventually these two universes hit the peak of the bagel because they're separating from each other, but they speak a common language, it's gravity. And eventually, like a cannonball arcing, they begin to come toward each other, drawn by each other's gravity, and they go faster and faster. They accelerate as they're caught by the other's gravity. And then at the very end, at the very outer perimeter of the bagel, they run into each other and they destroy each other. And that destruction just happens to be the hole at the center of the next big bagel. So we may be headed for the destruction of the universe itself. I don't think we'll have any trouble escaping a dying sun, because by then we will be in so many places. There will be so many human colonies all over the place that it will be ridiculous. But escaping the very end of the universe itself is going to be trickier. And our challenge is to do something absolutely impossible. It's to squeeze everything we've known, everything we've invented, everything that we've seen through that infinitesimally tiny hole, that singularity at the end of the universe and into the next universe, so the next universe can start off or can begin where we ended off. So it can build on what we've learned. Does that make any sense? Wait, your sound is off.
It's interesting.
So we obviously could have a 2-hour discussion of this, but that's my view of things anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Megan has another question.
Thanks for giving me another chance. I've been reflecting on the holy fool archetype while listening to these sessions, and the kind of striding into what comes next, regardless of whether it's the beaten path or not. I'm just wondering if that archetype is meaningful to you, the kind of the two-way choice thing, and the lack of concern for whether there's a crocodile ahead or not. Do you have anything you'd like to share with us on that kind of line of thought?
Well, what's the archetype we're talking about?
The Holy Fool.
What is that?
Well, there's the Shakespearean kind of fool that comes up as a character who speaks what they consider
the Holy Fool. The Holy Fool.
Sorry, my accent.
Well, look, the value of the Holy Fool is that the Holy Fool can think and do things that nobody else can think and do. And so the value of the Holy Fool is that he has a wisdom that nobody else has, because he, like I, always manages to clap in between the spaces of other people's claps. And that is profoundly important to a cosmos searching out her next moves in possibility space. Profoundly important. So if I am lucky enough to be a holy fool, what an astonishing gift that would be.
Howard, at the top of the session, you mentioned a bunch of questions that you wanted to answer.
Right.
Can you reiterate and see if you missed
Well,
it?
I wanted to bring up the 6 deadly sins, the law of least effort and entropy. We've covered that pretty heavily on materialism, consumerism, waste, and vain display. I wanted to hit the test cases of sex, the bees, and Anne Boleyn. And we've covered a bit of that. And those were the major points that I wanted for tonight. How can this universe possibly have sex in it? If it's an entropic universe, it can't possibly have sex in it. Sex is just too complex. How could a universe of entropy possibly have a genome that includes roughly 3 trillion atoms all working as a team? How could that team precisely replicate itself when it peels apart? How could it imprecisely replicate itself with a mix and match of genes from another creature, a different sex, and yet come out so perfectly functional that we have noses and ears and lips and vocal cords? This is ridiculous. This is absolutely impossible. This is an anti-entropic universe. The fact is, science got lazy with the idea of entropy. Around 1550, there was a guy who was trying to figure out, in fact, Pascal was one of these guys, who were trying to figure out mathematical laws that would allow them to win at gambling games. And they came up with a math of probability and statistics. And they tried to apply this math to the universe. And sorry, this math, and that math eventually became the probabilistic math of entropy. For every single organized state of things, there are gazillions of possible states of unorganized things. And since those gazillions outweigh just one, obviously the universe is going to head for the gazillions of states of chaos. But the universe doesn't operate that way. If you study the simple timeline of the cosmos, it's the very opposite. And this is science getting fucking lazy. It's trying to reduce the universe to a math that we've had for 500 years, roughly. Now, it's old math. It's time for a new math. I got news for you. Our old math isn't cutting it. It's great for Galilean and even Einsteinian predictions about the cosmos, but the cosmos is all dead balls of stone. And the fact is that 4 billion years ago, this universe gave birth to life. And life is so anti-entropic that it defies belief. And if we don't understand how this universe could give birth to life, then our grand unified theories of everything, coming from unifying 5 forces, are grand unified theories of nothing at all. Our grand unified theories that are, well, they enrich us. Every new idea enriches us in some way, but they are phony. They are not what they claim to be. They are not grand unified theories of everything, not by a long shot. Until they can explain sexuality and the realm of the human spirit, sorry, they're not cutting it yet as science. They're still Oldowan stone toolkits. Not even Apulian stone toolkits that are chipped on both sides, or where you use the chips, the flakes, as blades. Sorry, we're so primitive in our science that it defies belief.
Is it safe to say that that's going to be the topic of the next two books?
The next two books are, and there's a debate about which one I should write next. The one that I'm working on is The Case of the Sexual Cosmos. Everything you know about nature is wrong, with some of the ideas of which you've heard over the last 3 sessions. The one beyond that is The Grand Unified Theory of Everything in the Universe, including sex, violence, and the human soul, which I've been obviously working on since I was 12 years old, and is the story of the universe in the kind of chronological order that we've been telling it in these 3 sessions. But it's roughly 77 episodes, and each episode is designed to overturn the way you conventionally see things and give you a whole new point of view. So if you have any votes about which I should write next, let me know.
And where can people contact you?
Well, let's see. I'm at Howl, like wolves howling at the moon. Oh, no, there's an easier one. I'm at Bloom at howardbloom.institute.
Excellent. Can you tell us a bit about the Institute?
Well, look, when I was 10 years old, and I was utterly lost. No other kid wanted to have anything to do with me in Buffalo. My parents didn't seem to want to have anything to do with me. 2 guys reached out across a distance of 350 years and saved me. And they were Anton von Leeuwenhoek and Galileo. So my obligation has always been to reach out over the next 350 years and save the next lost kid down the line. And but to do that, I need to have a platform sufficiently high to reach out across 350 years. And I need, well, the Howard Bloom Institute is to take my ideas and continue to grow them after I croak. We'll see how it makes out. But the people in the group have great enthusiasm. They're in Germany, London, LA, Pennsylvania, even New York City near me. So we'll see how they make out, and I hope they make out well, because the odds of my achieving what I've been setting out to do, what I've been stuck with. Look, I didn't choose this. It sort of chose me, the reaching out over 350 years and saving the next poor kid down the line. But to achieve that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it seems this group is eager to do it.
Thank you so much, Howard, for the last 3 sessions. So it's been
Thanks, David. It's been a pleasure, and you know that you were the one that came up with this chronological telling of the story of the universe, and I'm tremendously appreciative.
My pleasure. Peter, would you like to be tagged in to tell us what's coming up on the store?
Sure. Just first, thank you, Howard, for coming to the STOA. That was quite a treat. And then David for setting it up. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
and
Peter.
Tomorrow we have, oh, I got to enable screen sharing. We reclaim host access. So tomorrow we have a symposium at the STOA. I'll share my screen. Let us maybe make the meta crisis our superordinate goal. It's 10 a.m. The meta crisis is kind of the constellation of existential risks that threaten our existence. And it's till 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. We have 6 events, lots of fun stuff. So you can RSVP at thestoa.ca. And hope to see you there. And I'll take in back David to close.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and for giving all those great questions. And thanks again to Howard. I hope to see you back again soon.
Okay, have a good night, gang. And thank you.